Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Choe, and today I will explore Pax Romana, literally translated as the Roman peace in English, and how Pax Romana had contributed to the fall of Rome and the reforms that were made to really stabilize and bring Roman peace. Actually, was a myopic decision that was made by this Emperor Augustus. The background image that I have here is an image of the first emperor of the Roman Empire, and he is Augustus, of course. And what I want to explain before going into this presentation is that Emperor Augustus, since he was the first emperor of the Roman Empire, he needed to legitimize his rule because the power was moving from being a Roman Republic into becoming a Roman Empire. So he had to legitimize and show people how his rule was better than the rule of when under the Republic. So his way of legitimizing his rule was by implementing this Roman peace and showing that how his rule would make Rome be so prosper and so affluent and so full of culture, literature, and diverse architecture, monuments, and projects that he could implement. So yeah, just keep that in mind before listening to what I have to say in this presentation. Okay, so this is my abstract, or the big idea of what I wrote in my paper, and just take a few seconds to read it through. All right, so today my presentation will check through these checkpoints, which is the halting, the imperial expansion, second, military reforms, third, economic deterioration, and dearth of slave labor and encroachment of barbarian tribes. So first, the halting, the imperial expansion. Julius Caesar's war campaigns. Okay, so before Augustus rose to power, Julius Caesar was a very prominent general, and he has this really famous commentary on Gallic wars, that the campaigns that he had, and Julius Caesar had very frequent and successful war campaigns. But the problem was, because Rome expanded into a lot of civilized already, Rome already had expanded into civilized nations. Rome had to go into the less civilized, or whom Roman called them as barbarians. And so these barbaric tribes have a very different idea of what warfare was like, because most of the civilized countries, if they were conquered, they will really, they will surrender completely and understand that they have lost to Rome. But then these barbaric tribes, they just don't understand this idea of losing the war. They will frequently and constantly rebel against Rome, even when they were quelled once. So that was the problem that made Rome very caught up in this constant war campaigns that made everyone very tired of frequent fightings. So there were frequent rebellions, and Rome was unfit for guerrilla warfare, which meant Rome had a very strategic and set up structure of its armies, whereas the barbarians, they didn't really have that structured look to that soldiers, and they would go into guerrilla warfare, in which Rome was very unfit for it. So it made Rome quite not as successful as they could have been in other places. So that really lengthened the period of time Julius Caesar was in Gaul, and lengthened the time that other soldiers were there too. And also, So this, because of this continued warfare and war campaigns, people were tired of war. And so it kind of followed that after Augustus came into power, he would halt the imperial expansion. And also Augustus did not have this incentive to really continue on with this imperial expansion because during the Republic, aristocrats and military leaders use war as a way to gain popularity and financial advancement because if they want a war, then everyone will like them. And so that worked as an incentive for them. Whereas Augustus, he didn't have that incentive. He would rather not want there to be frequent wars and frequent imperial expansion campaigns so that the power will be, split into other aristocrats. He wouldn't want other aristocrat and military leaders to rose into power and be a challenge to him. So he would not want that happen, and thus he lacked the incentive to continue on with this expansion. Okay, and so Augustus made military reforms because he was afraid that these aristocrats and war generals would come into power and challenge him. Back then, before Augustus rose into power during the Republic, there were certain ties between generals and soldiers because generals were the ones who paid soldiers. So, as you know, Julius Caesar, he fought against the Republic and the government, and his soldiers followed him, not the Rome. And that's because there was a tie that really bonded Julius Caesar and his soldiers, because Julius Caesar was the one to feed them, to give them salaries and share their booty and everything. And so Augustus starts to centralize the army and bring it under the government and under his authority. And so he made a lot of military reforms that would make this happen, the centralization of the army occur. And so no single general would ever command more than a minor fraction of troop at any given time. And he wouldn't let the generals give the salary to the soldiers. He would rather give out the salary to soldiers from imperial treasury, which was all from taxation and from the governmental spending, And also he would fix number of years to serve in the military so that because if you serve one general for a long, elongated period of time, that means you would be more loyal and be more familiar with that general rather than this abstract emperor image. So that's why he kind of fixed numbers of years to serve in the military, which is surprising considering how Rome prior to Augustus really relied on the imperial expansion. And so this created goodwill among the soldiers because, of course, he was paying everyone, but at the expense of 450 million sesterces per year. And this is more than half of Rome's annual tax revenue, so this is a huge spending that Augustus took on. And so he couldn't pay off all these people. So he reduced the army to 28 legions, which is half of what he had at Actium when he fought against Antony and Cleopatra. So that is, he just couldn't afford the army that he had. And other problems that this military reform brought about was that Roman pride and loyalty was heavily dependent upon the military, and citizens fought with a sense of duty with their own equipment. And so what that means is, regardless of socioeconomic status, everyone would fight in the military. And so there is this word in Latin, equitatis and pedites, and these two words are both of them refer to soldiers, but equitatis mean horsemen or cavalry, which means they were rich enough to afford horses, whereas pedites, they were not rich enough to afford horses, so they would fight on foot, so they're foot soldiers. So this equites and pedites is kind of a way to indicate the social status of a person. And so this really shows how everyone would fight in the military, and this really created bond between citizens, and it created a sense of patriotism. And once imperial expansion stopped, these this military was not ongoing, and so this kind of deteriorated this sense of patriotism and this bonding between diverse socioeconomic status. So prior to Augustus, military participation rate was about 18% to 24% regularly, and during some of the more prime times, it went up to 42 to 44%, and which is a huge number of people. Just imagine 4 out of 10 people in this room would go on to participate in the military. Of course, this is only indicative of free male, because women, children, and slave men were not really considered as Roman citizens at the time, but still. So only 19 out of 310 years from 410 to 101 BC were free from war. That means Rome was really in constant war. Only like 19 years out of 310 years were free from war. The rest of the time, Rome was constantly fighting. And this shows how Rome was dependent, how war was a fuel for Rome to go on. And another problem because that was caused by this military reform and the halting of Roman expansion was that Rome easily bestowed citizenship, unlike other like Greek civilization. So what meant by this was that people could easily obtain citizenship, so they didn't really have to feel that loyalty. Like Greek, in order for one to obtain Greek citizenship, on the other hand, would require a lot more efforts and obligations, whereas Rome, it was just given to them, so they didn't feel the need to be patriotic to the nation. And this because Rome was such a diverse, ethnically and culturally diverse empire, it really created fissure. That sense of loyalty to Rome was really gone. This really paved the way to the fall of Rome in a very literal sense. And yeah, war making brought greater civic cohesion than participation in any political, social, or cultural institutions. And so in Cicero's De Legibus, there are these 2 terms that he defines, and those are patria naturae, patria civitatis, which means the fatherland from the nature, which means that the fatherland that you're born from. That is, for instance, I am ethnically Korean, so my patria naturae would be Korea, whereas patria civitatis, because I'm currently in the United States and living here, my patria civitatis would be the United States. And so Cicero, or Cicero, he argued that patria civitatis is much more important than patria naturae, but then Augustus's reform really altered this balance, because a lot of people didn't really find the need to be loyal to patria civitatis and didn't really have much to engage into activities that patria civitatis were requiring. Okay, and so the problem was, because Rome was so heavily dependent on the imperial expansion, once it halted, economic deterioration followed. So military activity accounted roughly 72% of Rome's revenue. And it was military activity accumulates so much wealth that taxation was even entirely abolished in 167 BC. And because people really died off, this is a terrible idea to support a higher per capita income, but then because people were constantly dying, a higher per capita income could be afforded, because lesser people, more money but lesser people to divide up from, and so higher per capita income. And so once Augustus stopped this halting, he stopped this imperial expansion, he had to increase taxation in order to afford and account for this huge budget that was once afforded by military activity. So he created taxations, and one of them was he created this new fund called Aerarium Militare to pay wages and pensions for his, because he was paying the salaries to the soldiers. And he created two new taxes, and which was very unpopular to the public, and especially it was extremely unpopular amongst the middle and lower classes, because the higher classes, the higher aristocrats, they could find a leeway to, and they were really corrupt during this time, and so find a leeway to not pay the taxes, and so the burden was all upon the middle and lower classes. So these people, most of them farmers, moved outside the cities and beyond the domain of tax regime. And of course, Augustus, not only did he lose this whole source of wealth, but he also started to spend a lot of money on various projects. The Pax Romana is also also known as the golden age of Roman culture and literature and art, and so he implemented a lot of various projects. And so in order for him to afford them, he minted a huge amount of coins, and he started to mint coins that were worth more than the value of the metal used to produce them, which is a very unhealthy way to run an empire. And also because he wanted to constantly engage in trade, he started to trade more and more with other nations, and this created an trade deficit and thus an afflux of coinage. Max Shapiro, he is a leading scholar in this field. He said the volume of money he issued in the 2 decades between 27 BC and 680 was more than 10 times the amount issued by his predecessor in the 20 years before. And so this really shows how much money he was creating and minting at the time, and this huge inflation that caused economic deterioration. And because of this, food prices doubled and real estate rose by 150%. But then, yes, of course, money creation did slow down during Emperor Tiberius's era. But then when money creation slowed, recession and employment hit as well, and really leading towards the decline of Roman Empire. This is the picture here, shows a coin that was minted during Augustan era. Just a picture there, just to give you guys a visual image of what a Roman coin looked like at the time. And there were other problems: dearth of slave labor and barbaric encroachment that was constantly there due to this stopping of imperial expansion and the military reforms that he had made. And dearth of slave labor was extremely problematic because 1/3 of Roman population were slaves. On the left, you can see the picture of Roman slaves pouring wine and this liquid onto their master's plate. So these are all this is an image of slaves. And so dearth of slave labor was created because piracy and tributes or war prisoners were basically the way for Rome to have a constant influx of slaves. And once the source of slave kind of stopped, because in order for Augustus to implement peace, again, he stopped the imperial expansion, and he did not want the pirates to be shown in Roman Empire. And so the dearth of slave labor occurred. And because Rome hugely relied on this slave labor and slave population, this created a huge problems, especially to the agricultural field. And Rome was facing barbaric encroachment because since Rome didn't constantly fight, um, their strength wasn't as the same once a barbarian started to attack them. So um, Rome did fall to the barbaric tribe under the king named Odovacer or Odowaker, or however you want to call him. But yeah, so Rome does fall to a barbaric tribe. And so this was, I would argue, due to the fact that Rome was not keeping up with their military technology and military training because um, and Rome thus weakened militaristically because of this whole reforms that Augustus had made. So thank you so much for your attention. And it was a bit of a longer side of a presentation, but hope you guys enjoyed and learned something new in my presentation. And I look forward to hear other scholars speak. Thank you.